There is a belief that comforts those who have been abandoned, and that is exactly why it is dangerous. The idea that if the person who hurt you one day returns, it is because they finally saw your value. That is not what happens. And Carl Jung, if he was sitting in front of you right now, would not use this story to console you. He would use it to wake you up. Because those who return after inflicting a wound rarely return out of recognition. They return because they left within themselves a chapter that refuses to close on its own. It is not about you. It is about what was left pending within them. Most people prefer the romantic version. They came back because they realized what they lost. It is a beautiful story. It is also, most of the time, false. What truly motivates a return is not clarity regarding your value, but the unbearable discomfort of carrying something unfinished. The human psyche, according to Jungian understanding, does not tolerate stories without an ending well. It needs to close the cycle, even if only to reopen it and hurt you all over again. And this is where the first cold truth of this night lies. The person does not return for you. They return to the moment where they themselves got stuck. Think about a physical wound for an instant. A cut that wasn't cleaned properly doesn't heal right. It swells, it throbs, it demands attention all the time, even when you are doing something completely different. The mind works in a similar way with stories that didn't have a clear closure. It keeps returning to the same point, poking at the same memory, reviewing the same scene, not because it loves reliving the pain, but because a very old and very primitive part of us demands coherence. It needs things to make sense, to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. When someone leaves a relationship abruptly, without explanation, without a clean farewell, they are not free from it. They just changed the setting. The story keeps running inside them in a loop, demanding a resolution that never came. And this is precisely why a return usually comes loaded with a strange, almost desperate urgency that doesn't match "I finally saw your value." It matches more with "I need to resolve this to be able to sleep." It is not matured love knocking at the door. It is a nervous system trying to close a file that was left open. The difference between these two things is what separates those who fall into the trap from those who finally understand the game. Carl Jung called a complex any psychic content loaded with emotional energy that has not been processed. A complex does not disappear just because you moved to another city, blocked the number, or tried to move on with someone else. It stays there, submerged, driving behavior without asking for permission. That is why people who swear they have forgotten someone send messages at 3 in the morning. It is not a character flaw. It is an unresolved complex demanding attention, the same way a splinter stuck in the skin demands to be removed before the area stops hurting. Now apply this to the person who hurt you and vanished. They may have moved on with their life, posted smiling photos, started another relationship, looking from the outside whole. But inside, the complex remains active because they never processed what they caused. And processing does not mean feeling guilt in an organized and mature way. Most of the time it just means feeling a diffuse discomfort that they don't even know how to name, a malaise that appears at random moments and that they silence with work, with alcohol, with distraction, with another romance that never fills the right hole because the hole is not about the new person, it is about the old chapter. This explains why the return, when it happens, usually comes at moments of her instability, not your stability. She doesn't appear when she is at peace with herself and decides, consciously and maturely, that you deserve recognition. She appears when something in her life has shaken, when the silence has become too loud, when an unprocessed complex has risen to the surface with more force than she could contain. The return, almost always, is a symptom of her. It is not a compliment to you. There is a difference that needs to be absolutely clear. It is one thing for someone to return because they have grown, understood their mistake, done the real internal work, and arrive with genuine responsibility without demanding anything in return, simply acknowledging. This exists, it is rare, and when it happens it carries a completely different weight, a weight of responsibility, not urgency. It is quite another thing, far more common for someone to return because they can no longer stand the internal noise that the lack of closure causes. And this person is not looking to repair you. They are looking to silence themselves. The confusion between these two things is what keeps so many people stuck, waiting for a return that, even when it happens, does not bring the relief they imagined, because it was never about reparation. It was about her peace. It is exactly at this point, when the distinction between being sought after and being used as a psychological painkiller becomes clear, that the question shifts direction. It stops being, "Why didn't she value me before?" and becomes, "What am I going to do with my own unfinished story, regardless of what she decides to do with hers?" And it was exactly for this turning point that I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. It is not a course on how to win back someone who left. It is a 60-day map, built upon the psychology of Carl Jung, for you to stop waiting for someone else to close your stories for you, and finally begin to close them with your own hands. Each day delivers a lesson, a key, a question that cuts deep, and a small action for you to record in your journal. It is not distant theory. It is daily practice of individuation, the process by which you stop being a reflection of others' absences and finally become who you truly are. If you feel that you carry too many unfinished stories, comment, "Yo quiero fechar ese ciclo," and the link to the Código do Despertar is pinned in the first comment. It is not about waiting for anyone's return. It is about stopping the need for it. Let us return to what remains pending within a person when something ends badly. The human mind deals very poorly with open endings. There is even a classic name for this in psychology, the Zeigarnik effect, the realization that unfinished tasks occupy more space in memory than completed tasks. A relationship interrupted abruptly functions like a task that never received the completed mark. The mind revisits, trying to close what the conscious behavior has already tried to push under the rug. This is why the person who hurt someone and disappeared often remembers specific, small, almost irrelevant details. A phrase spoken in a car, the scent of perfume, a song playing in the background of some farewell. It is not romanticism. It is the brain trying to reconstruct the scene to finally find a meaning that makes the pain stop circulating. The problem is that she is not returning to find you as you are today. She is returning to try to find that specific frozen moment and resolve what was left unresolved there. This means that in her mind, you never aged, never changed, never grew. You are the photograph of the day everything fell apart, and that is why so many returns fail. The person is talking to a memory, not to who you have become. Think of a messy drawer you never had the courage to organize. You close the drawer, but you know it's there, full, on the verge of jamming if you force it too much. Every time you walk past the piece of furniture, a part of you remembers that that drawer needs attention. An unresolved story works exactly like this within the psyche. You might not open it for months, even years, but it keeps taking up mental space, generating a low, constant background noise that no damn thing can solve because it isn't physical pain. It's psychological incompleteness. And here is the point that most people ignore. You also have drawers like that. Perhaps they aren't about the same person. Perhaps they are about goodbyes you never truly said, pardons you never gave, words you swallowed to avoid conflict that remain there, festering. The difference between someone who lives as a hostage to the past and someone who truly moves on is not the size of the pain they felt, but the willingness to open the drawer, organize its contents, and finally, close the door with awareness, not with avoidance. This also explains why so many people run into someone who deeply wounded them years later and feel a strange, almost disappointing sense of calm. It's not because they stopped caring. It's because at some point, without realizing it, they closed on their own what they had expected the other person to close. The work of closure does not require the other person's participation. It requires your willingness to look at what was left hanging and give it a destination, even without an answer, even without apologies, even without the return you once imagined you deserved. According to the Jungian reading of how we perceive others, much of what we feel for a person is not about who they really are, but about what we project onto them. Jung described projection as the process by which internal, often unconscious contents are cast outward and seen as if they belong to someone else. This means, quite directly, that you rarely fall in love with someone exactly as they are. You fall in love with the function they fulfill in your life, the one who listens when no one else does, the one who fills the silence you fear, the one who seems to give back a value you couldn't see on your own. The problem is that this function is fragile. The day the person stops fulfilling this role, whether out of exhaustion, change, or any other reason, the sensation that remains is not just the loss of a person. It is the sensation that the void they were filling has reappeared, raw and undisguised. And that is precisely why so many people run after something new after a heartbreak, a new relationship, a new city, an entirely new routine, trying to hurriedly recreate the function that was lost. But most of the time, the void was not in the person's absence. It was inside them all along, just temporarily covered. There is a common scene that illustrates this with painful precision. Someone ends a relationship, and in less than 2 weeks is already talking to someone else, trying to feel that initial intensity again. On the outside, it looks like quick recovery. On the inside, it is flight disguised as movement. The person is not processing the loss. They are plugging the hole with whatever is available, the same way one might patch a burst pipe with duct tape. It works for a while, until the pressure builds up again and the leak returns, usually worse. This does not mean that seeking something new is wrong. It means that seeking something new without first recognizing what was truly yours and what was just projection guarantees that you will repeat the same pattern with a different face. You change the person, but you keep demanding from them the same impossible function to fill a void that was never theirs to fill because it was yours from the beginning. The person who returned after hurting you also carries this same inverted dynamic. Often what they projected onto you was the feeling of being enough, of being accepted without effort, of existing without needing to perform. When they walked away, that feeling vanished along with them. And the return in this case is not about recognizing your full human value. It is about trying to recover the emotional function you served in their life. It is uncomfortable to admit, but it is more honest. Sometimes you are not loved for who you are. You are requested for the absence you leave behind. Understanding this completely changes the way one interprets a return. It ceases to be proof of worth and becomes, in the best of cases, an invitation to investigate together what really happened, and in the worst of cases, just another attempt to patch an old void with the same old bandage. The question that truly matters is not, did they realize what they lost, but are they willing to look at their own void, or do they just want me to go back to covering that hole again? There is, however, a different category of longing, rarer and more honest, which must be clearly separated from what we have seen so far. Sometimes, what the person feels is not just the discomfort of an unfinished story. It is the genuine recognition that they lost something rare. Someone capable of seeing them beyond the social mask they wear in the world every day. Carl Jung called this mask a persona, the set of behaviors we construct to be socially acceptable, to make a good impression, to avoid exposing what we consider too vulnerable. The exhaustion you feel after socializing for hours on end is not pure physical fatigue. It is the wear and tear of keeping an edited version of yourself functioning the entire time, smiling when you don't want to, agreeing when you disagree, occupying a specific role to keep everyone around you comfortable. Few people in life have access to what exists behind that mask, and when someone loses one of these rare people, the pain is not just for their absence. It is for the absence of the version of themselves that could only exist in that specific presence. That is why sometimes what the person misses is not exactly you, but who they were able to be when they were by your side. This seems subtle, but it changes everything. They are not crying for your absence as an isolated individual. They are crying for the loss of a space where the persona could rest, where the mask could fall without consequence, where being truly seen did not cost a high price. This type of connection is rare precisely because it requires two things that are difficult to find together: enough security to strip away one's performance, and enough maturity not to use that exposure as a weapon later. When this combination exists and is subsequently lost, the grief is different. It is not the grief of someone who lost just any relationship. It is the grief of someone who lost one of the rare places where they could breathe without being on display. Even so, one must be careful with this interpretation because it can become another trap. Missing the version of yourself that existed alongside someone does not mean that this version depends exclusively on that person to exist again. It may have been awakened by that relationship, but it belongs to you, not them. Confusing these two things is the reason why so many people mistakenly believe that they will only feel whole again if that specific person returns. It is not true. The capacity to be seen without a mask did not disappear with that person. It just lay dormant, waiting for another safe space which can indeed be built alone, even before being shared with someone else again. And it is precisely this dormant capacity that the Código do Despertar exists to reactivate. Because the problem was never just the absence of those who left, it was the forgetting of who you are when no one is watching, when there is no audience, when the mask can finally come off. Over the course of 60 days, each lesson of the program works on exactly this reconnection. Questions that pull you out of automatic performance, declarations that reorganize what you believe you deserve, micro-actions that gradually restore access to that version of yourself that seem to depend on someone else to exist. If you recognize this feeling of having lost not just someone, but a part of yourself along with them, comment, "Eu quero me reencontrar," now. The Código do Despertar is in the first pinned comment waiting for you. The person who knew how to see you may not come back, but the person who knows how to see themselves again, that version depends only on you. There is a cruel delay in the way human consciousness processes loss, and it explains why so many people only realize the value of something after they can no longer do anything about it. The conscious mind is trained to move on quickly, fix the routine, distract itself with work, fill the calendar, smile in photos, prove to itself and others that everything is fine. But the unconscious does not operate at that same speed. It continues processing, revisiting, digesting the loss long after the conscious mind has declared the matter closed. That is why the pain of a loss often hits harder weeks or months after the fact, not at the exact moment it happens. In the instant of the rupture, the body enters survival mode, focused on getting through the initial shock. It is only when the distractions diminish, when the routine stabilizes again, when the external noise lowers, that the deep processing truly begins. And it is precisely in this silence, when there is nothing left to distract, that many people finally face what they had been avoiding all along. Imagine someone who, right after ending a relationship, dives into work, goes out every night, fills their calendar with appointments, avoids any moment alone with themselves. For weeks, they seem to be doing well, even excessively well. But as soon as this rush slows down, whether on vacation or on a regular night with no plans, the pain appears with a disproportionate, almost frightening force. It is not a relapse. It is the unconscious, finally, having the space to process what the consciousness insisted on delaying. This same mechanism explains why so many people only recognize the value of a person after they are gone for good. While the relationship existed, the conscious mind was too busy with the day-to-day, with the small irritations, with the familiarity that makes everything seem guaranteed and replaceable. It is only in the absence, in the silence they leave behind, that the mind stops operating on autopilot and begins to piece together, retrospectively, the true magnitude of what existed there. This is uncomfortable to admit, but it is honest. Clarity about the value of something most of the time does not arrive before the loss. It arrives after, as a cruel kind of delayed wisdom. And that is exactly why waiting for someone to realize your value before acting is a dangerous gamble. Many people only realize it after there is nothing left to be done. And when they finally realize it and come back, they are often not coming back because of clarity about you. They are coming back because the internal silence has become unbearable, and they need at any cost to close what the conscious mind tried to sweep under the rug for too long. Faced with all of this, when the return finally happens, the question most people ask is wrong from the root. The automatic question is, are we getting back together? Will it work this time? But that is not the central question. The central question, the only one that truly matters, is another. Who have you become while they were absent? This shift in focus changes everything. Because while your attention is turned toward the possibility of reconciliation, you continue, without realizing it, to hand over the steering wheel of your life to someone else's decision. Your peace, once again, depends on an answer that is not yours to give. But when the question turns inward, to what you did with the time you spent alone, the power silently changes hands. Think of two possible versions of the same person, 1 year after having been abandoned. In the first version, they spent the entire months waiting, checking social media, keeping life on pause, putting off important decisions in the expectation that someday that return would justify the wait. In the second version, they cried what they needed to cry, but kept building. They learned new things, reorganized routines, took care of their body, invested in relationships that nourished them, and looked within with an honesty they had previously avoided. If, after a year, the same person who left knocks on the door, the meaning of that return is completely different for each of these two versions. For the one who stayed on pause, the return carries an almost desperate weight, as if it were the only thing capable of validating the lost time. For the one who transformed, the return becomes just one more piece of information, not a sentence. The person who grew no longer needs the reconciliation to feel complete. They can choose to rebuild if it makes genuine sense, or they can simply observe, with an almost clinical calm, that specific chapter no longer fits into the story they are writing now. This is the real difference between need and choice. As long as the return is necessary for your sense of worth, you are a hostage to it, even if it never happens. The instant it becomes just one possible choice among many, without urgency, without emotional dependence, the tables have turned. And it is precisely this turning point that separates those who emerge from a pain stronger from those who emerge from the same pain definitively stagnant. The deepest wound when someone leaves after hurting you is almost never the departure itself. It is the silent belief, installed without you noticing, that your worth depended on the recognition of that specific person. It was they who decided you were sufficient, special, worthy of staying. And so when they left, it felt as if your own worth had left along with them. This is the quietest and most common trap of all. No human being should carry the responsibility of validating the existence of another. But that is exactly what happens when we outsource self-esteem to the gaze of others. You hand someone, without realizing it, the pen that signs the verdict on who you are. And when that person leaves, taking the pen with them, there remains the feeling that the judgment also departed incomplete, pending, as if your identity were trapped, waiting for a signature that will never come. Yet this logic, when looked at closely, does not hold up. A person's worth was never born from external recognition. It was only, at some point, confused with it. A precious stone remains precious even inside a cave where no one has ever entered to admire it. Recognition does not create value. It only reveals it to whoever is looking. And if the person who was looking has left, that concerns their ability to see, not the real existence of that which should have been seen. True liberation at this point does not happen when someone finally recognizes your worth. It happens long before that, when you stop needing that recognition to feel complete. It is an internal shift, silent and almost imperceptible from the outside, but one that completely changes the relationship you have with your own existence. You stop walking through life implicitly asking for someone to confirm that you deserve to be here, and start walking knowing it, with or without an audience, with or without applause, with or without a return. It is exactly at this frontier, between depending on the gaze of others and sustaining one's own value alone, that most people get stuck indefinitely, because no one teaches you, in practice, how to make this crossing. And it was for this specific crossing that the Código do Despertar was designed. It is not about convincing anyone to come back. It is about dismantling, one day at a time, the belief that your importance needs someone else's signature to be valid. Over the course of 60 days, you receive daily lessons built upon the psychology of Carl Jung, with practical keys, questions that confront this very emotional dependency, and declarations that gradually reprogram the way you sustain your own value. You read, perform the day's micro-action, record it in your journal, and observe over time the pen of judgment returning to your own hand. If you are tired of waiting for external recognition to feel enough, comment now, "Eu recupero o meu valor," and get the Código do Despertar in the first pinned comment. After this chapter, there is still one last truth left, perhaps the most definitive of all, and it comes next. In the end, after this entire crossing, the most honest conclusion that exists is not about anyone's return. It is not about reconciliation. It is not about an apology. It is not about someone finally admitting they were wrong. The greatest victory possible, the only one that truly changes your life permanently, is to stop needing any of these things to happen in order to feel whole. This does not mean hardening, closing your heart, or pretending the pain did not exist. It means something more subtle and more powerful, stopping the practice of placing your own peace in the hands of a decision that is not yours. As long as you wait for a return as proof of your value, your peace is hosted at an address that is not yours, subject to a decision that another person may make, postpone, or never make at all. The instant you reclaim this peace within yourself, it ceases to depend on any phone call, text message, or knock at the door. Absence, viewed in this light, ceases to be just a void to be endured, and becomes a path silent and demanding, back to who you are when no one is defining that for you. It is in this space, without the presence that once took up so much room, that many people rediscover forgotten hobbies, silences that no longer frighten, and a more honest relationship with their own reflection in the mirror. Not because absence is good in itself, but because it forces a confrontation that constant presence used to postpone. You can close this video now and continue waiting for someone someday to decide to validate what you already were, even before you met them. You can keep checking your phone, reviewing old conversations, and delaying your own reconstruction in the hope of an answer that may never arrive, and which, even if it did, would not have the power to complete you as you imagine. Or you can accept the most uncomfortable and most liberating truth of all. No one needs to come back for you to start existing as a whole person again. The illusion that your value depended on their gaze ends here. The choice from now on is entirely yours.